In one of my previous videos, I would talk about the bizarre trade involving Chris Draper and how the Detroit Red Wings would acquire Draper for $1. Acquiring an NHL player for a single dollar, or perhaps the price of a coffee, is absurd enough from face value. But when you consider that Draper would go on to having a historic career with the Red Wings, it has to be one of the strangest trades in NHL history. Yet, little did I know, this was just the tip of the iceberg. Because back in 1990, the New York Rangers would acquire Shepard from the Buffalo Sabres for $1. But here's the thing, Shepard at the time was not an unknown prospect, or perhaps unproven like Chris Draper. No, not even close. This man had a 38-goal, 65-point rookie season. He would even finish second for Rookie of the Year. Now, he was having consistent ankle issues. But really, $1. Because the very next season, Shepard would put up 24 goals, 47 points in 57 games, where he would then sign a 3-year, $1.8 million deal with the Detroit Red Wings. And this is where things get absurd. Shepard on the Wings would develop into a superstar. In 1994, Shepard would have a 52-goal, 93-point season. He would even score 30 goals in 43 games. The next season, this man was a stud. However, the injury bug would return. Shepard would struggle with his ankles, hamstrings, and at this point, the Red Wings as a franchise were building momentum, and they needed a player they could rely on. Thus, they would make a blockbuster deal, as the Detroit Red Wings would trade Shepard and get this, 1-for-1 for Igor Larionov, who would be a massive piece to the Red Wings dynasty, as Larionov would help carry Detroit to 3 Stanley Cup finishes. And to think that Shepard was acquired for $1 and would later be flipped for a Hall of Famer has to be one of the strangest turn of events the game has ever seen. Yet, this might not be as absurd as the John Tucker saga, because back in the 80s, John Tucker was a fascinating prospect, as he would score 140 points in 60 games, but somehow he would fall to the second round. The next season, Tucker would continue to dominate. In fact, he would get called up for 21 games where he would score 12 goals. Not bad. He would have a great rookie season. In 1986, he would have a 31-goal season. However, it would happen. John Tucker would be traded for himself. You heard that right. As the Washington Capitals would trade Buffalo, future considerations, 1-for-1 for John Tucker. Like seriously, what the hell was going on with Buffalo in this era? Bizarre stuff, man. Like, Buffalo fans, tell me why you do this. Because get this, John Tucker would play 38 games for the Capitals. He would help them in the playoffs. And 6 months later, to the day, he would be traded back to Buffalo for an undisclosed amount of money. Therefore, the future considerations was him. In fact, it is hilarious to look at this trade on paper. Like, what? If you saw this without the context, it would be so confusing, as the Buffalo Sabres in this deal basically rented out Tucker to the Capitals for cash. But the story doesn't stop here. Upon returning, Tucker would play 8 games with the Sabres, where, and get this, the man would be traded once again for future considerations within just over a year span. John Tucker, who was once a young 30-goal scorer, was traded 3 times for nothing, with one of the trades being for himself. The next season, Tucker would retire from the NHL, where he would pack his bags and play in Italy. The season after that, Tucker would come back, where he would sign with the Tampa Bay Lightning. He would be named assistant captain and go on to have a great career. He would retire again, and he would finish his career in Japan. However, both of these trades don't even come close. Don't even sniff the detrimental trade we saw back in 2019 as the Vancouver Canucks, after a 4-year playoff drought, would make a shocking trade deadline acquisition, as they would trade one of their top prospects, a 2nd and a 4th round pick, in return for Tyler Foley, which from face value is a great deal. Foley is a secondary scorer any team could use, somebody who can play top line minutes, but more importantly, he's a player who can take off pressure from the Stars, on top of being a Stanley Cup champion. And Foley would not disappoint. 10 points minutes in the final 10 games, and he would help an underdog Canucks team get all the way to the second round. So even though this trade was a bit bizarre, considering that Foley was a potential rental on a team with no recent playoff success, retaining Foley would make a lot of sense. He was a great fit and carried a respectable cap hit. However, Jim Benning apparently doesn't like respectable cap hits. Because get this, in a recent Spittin' Chicklets interview,
they're going to come back to me at some point, and I can't imagine my agent's going to be lying to me, but I don't think that they called ever. It was definitely kind of like a frustrating experience because the city's amazing. We had a really good team.
Foley would reveal that he was fully committed to re-signing with the Canucks. However, the Canucks would straight up ignore Foley, and they would let him, Chris Tanev, and Jacob Markstrom walk to free agency. And it's not even that the trade was horrible, it was the ripple effect. The next season, Vancouver would fall off a cliff. Everything was going wrong. They desperately needed that secondary scoring, specifically on the wing, and they needed a reliable defenseman. I mean, probably a bunch of both. So, what did they do? They would trade the 9th overall pick, among other assets, for Connor Garland and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. So, do you see the problem? They literally had possession of both players, but for whatever reason, they would let them walk, and then were forced to make a panic trade for those exact players. And here's the thing, if you've watched any of my previous videos, I have been harping on this deal constantly. Why? It is the perfect example of what not to do in a trade, a cautionary tale, because when we put these trades on the same list, as of today, here is what Vancouver gained, and here is what they traded away. Yep. In recent years, we have seen a trend where NHL teams make splashes at the trade deadline. But instead of paying through the roof for a guy who might only suit up for 10 games and walk to free agency, teams like Tampa, Vegas, the Avalanche have instead shifted to focusing on young talent who fit the mold of the team today with the upside of growing into a much better player tomorrow. This is where things get absurd because they were forced to make a trade to replace Foley and Chris Tanev on top of eating Oliver Ekman-Larsson's monster contract meant Vancouver would not have the cap space to re-sign their captain, Bo Horvat, who they would soon trade, but more importantly, back in 2021, as a result of these trades, the Vancouver Canucks wouldn't have the cap space to lock down Pettersson to a max-term deal. They'd be forced to give Pettersson a bridge deal, a contract that is blowing up in their face. It's a similar reason to why Calgary had to trade Tkachuk, as he was ready to lock in that long-term deal. Calgary wasn't comfortable, and by the time Tkachuk's bridge deal ended, Calgary would be forced into a position to trade him. I'm not saying Pettersson is going to force a trade by any means, but this situation does highlight the consequences of not locking in your franchise players. Look at the Devils signing Jack Hughes, the Sabres locking in Tage Thompson, building block players. Those teams look like geniuses, which has led to the Devils having ample cap space to sign depth scorers and players that will round out their roster. Ironically, with that cap space, the Devils would acquire Foley this past offseason, whereas today, Pettersson is the star of the team. He wants to see success before he signs a long-term deal, which will, without a doubt, be far more expensive than if Vancouver locked him in 2 years ago. We're talking about a $4 million difference. That $4 million in additional cap space is the difference between having championship caliber depth or a shaky bottom six, as this trade emphasizes how if a GM isn't focused on the long term, a single trade can spiral a team into disaster. Can you name a strange NHL trade? Comment down below. If you like hockey cards, go check out the RTH card store to see the newest custom hockey packs, specifically the Vancouver Canucks Guaranteed Auto Pack. And as always, thanks for watching.